Well, welcome to week number 5, believe it or not. With that, as we continue in our series, The Path, based upon a book by Andy Stanley, and was prompted by the book of Proverbs for Andy Stanley. But I'll actually have some excerpts from there. But 29 times the book of Proverbs mentions the path, or paths that we are on. And here are just a few that I want to point out here today. Solomon is warning us about buddying up, if you will, with people with questionable morals. He says, "My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths." That's Proverbs 1:15. That's the path we don't want to take. Proverbs 2:9, he talks about following the way of wisdom. He says, "Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path." Those are the paths that we do want to take. In Proverbs 3:6, he says, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." Proverbs 4:26 says that he makes level paths for our feet and take only ways that are firm. A little added principle to this. And if you've been with us for most of the series, you know that the principles that are true in geography are equally true in all of life. Those principles are pretty straightforward that we're going to take a look at. We have the principle of the path, that aspect that your direction determines your destination. And that's true. And this morning I want to add a qualifier to Solomon's statement here, one he makes here. One slight modification that I think you're going to agree with me. It's very true. You see, what gets your attention determines your direction and ultimately our destination. Got that? Whatever gets our attention. Have you ever been driving and all of a sudden you're driving along and you see something and then you're watching and where do you go? Or if you've seen on YouTube, you get these individuals who are walking and they've got their phones and they're texting, not paying any attention. Distracted driving, if you will. You see, that leads us to the concept and the principle of focus. You see, your attention determines your direction. Not too long ago, including Indiana, almost every state in the nation passed laws prohibiting people from what? Texting and driving or talking on their cell phones without some sort of hands-free device. I even have a hands-free device in my Buick. Okay? Because they knew that if a person is staring at their phone, giving more attention to it than the road, there's probably a good chance that they'll steer themselves right off the road. Or maybe steer themselves into somebody else on the road. What you give your attention to will determine your direction. And your direction will determine your destination. Think about this. Those of you who have horses, sometimes you have to have a horse and you have to put, what do you call those, blinders? And you put them there so what? They can't see from side to side, and you can make sure that they're looking straight ahead and they'll go where you need them to go. Mankind has known this for thousands of years because Solomon taught it to us 3,000 years ago in the book of Proverbs. And here's his whole statement on attention, if you would. He says, Proverbs 4:25-27, he says, "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Make level paths for your feet and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil." In other words, our destination is determined by our direction, and our direction is dictated by whatever holds our attention. Okay? even if you are ADHD, okay? Whatever is holding on to our attention, that's the direction we're going to go, if you will. The things that capture your attention will influence your direction. Okay? You know, between my junior and senior years in high school, I attended what they called Deeper Life Camp at Round Lake Christian Assembly. And during that week, we were challenged to go deeper in our relationship with God, to learn to be in tune with what God was doing in our lives. And also during that week, one of the camp staffers, his name was Danny Vasquez, sat down with me one afternoon as I was sitting in the cafeteria, and he introduced himself. I knew him because he was on staff and everything. And he told me more about his life. See, before he became a preacher, he had been a surgeon. Well, that was rather interesting. And he talked about how in his surgery he had saved many, many lives. But he also shared that became frustrating to him. And he went on to say that those people he saved, you know what? They eventually died. And God impressed on him to do something that would last for eternity. And God got my focus on that eternal perspective. And I went from becoming the President of the United States to becoming a preacher, which I found out later was the bargain that my mom made with God in the first place. But nice to know. But in my freshman year at college, one of my roommates was preparing to go to the Philippines for a year as a mission intern, Brian. And I was impressed, and he influenced me as well to be in tune to God's path. You know, he was a sophomore. I'm just a freshman, you know. And but you could tell he just was very much. That's where I was first introduced to fasting, was with Brian. And just before he headed out, he told me that, you know what? He says, Mark, God might be calling you to the mission field. At which I proceeded to chuckle. Yeah, Brian, right. I said, you know, Brian, God's called you to the mission field. He's not called me to the mission field. Now, I could have stopped there, right? And yet, no, I said, I am never going to go to the mission field. Well, summer came. I was working at Whirlpool as a for a summer job. And where, of course, did I end up between my sophomore and junior years? Zimbabwe, Africa. Through a number of events and experiences that God brought me to the point that I needed to be obedient to his call. And so my recommendation, one, always be obedient, but never, don't use the word never with God. You know, because I'm convinced, as I look in the mirror most mornings, God has a sense of humor. For sure. I think, you know, that's why I have a 14-year-old daughter today. Because back when I was 30, God said, you think you have things under control. Well, he has no clue what's coming. And I didn't. I have a 14-year-old daughter. You know, those experiences are positive experiences, how attention influences our direction. But I could also give some negative ones as well. You know, like every principle, the principle of attention can work for us or against us, right? That's for sure. And if you think for a minute, you'll probably be able to drum up a half a dozen instances where your attention got diverted in ways that you wish it never had. Andy Stanley in his book writes this. He says, all of us have people or events or opportunities in our past that reflect the much more frequent flip side. He says, looking back, there are people you wish you had never met, relationships you wish you'd never initiated, numbers you wish you'd never called, voicemails you wish you'd never acknowledged, business opportunities you wish you had ignored. Life was better before these things grabbed your attention. In many cases, the path you were on before they came along was the path you should have adhered to. But you didn't, he writes. And what grabbed your attention altered your direction. No doubt, he says, you had a mental conversation that went something like this. Wow, would you look at that? I probably shouldn't go there, but perhaps I should double check to make sure I shouldn't go there. Yep, I shouldn't go there. Come on now, let's focus. You know, it probably wouldn't hurt to go there for just a moment. Remember when common sense seemed to get railroaded by the emotion of whatever or whoever it was that grabbed your attention. It says before you knew it, you were moving in an entirely different direction. Usually there's a strong emotional appeal to the things that grab our attention. We get sucked in to those detours because something emotionally engaging is on those paths. My observation, he writes, is that the things that tend to grab my attention are often things I should avoid. Advertisers make a living trying to grab my attention, and that's okay. Everyone needs to eat and live indoors. Great advertisements appeal to our emotions. And let's face it, malls and car dealerships are not emotionally neutral environments. But often the things that grab our attention lead to regret. What captures our attention influences our direction. You hear that over and over. You'll be saying it in your sleep here. Attention, direction, destination. That's the principle of the path in 3 words. As your attention goes, so goes your life. Or as Solomon put it, let your eyes look straight ahead. And what? Say it with me. Fix your gaze directly before you. Make level paths for your feet and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Keep your foot from evil. And so far we've put 2 verbs in front of attention. One is positive, something that captures our attention. And the other is negative, something that grabs our attention. And I want to give 2 more verbs a little later here that might be a little more useful for us that comes to our attention. But first, let me read you a little bit more of what Andy says in his book. He talks about his black lab, and I related to this. He says, I have a black lab whose attention seems to be genetically locked in on food. Okay? Now, at my house, I consider a rabbit food to my dog. A rabbit will take my dog anywhere, let me tell you. Loses sense of everything. But he's talking about his, he says, when it comes to food, I don't think Shadow really has a choice. It seems as if she can't help but follow a food-related scent. This has sent her in some not-so-pleasant directions. As you might be aware, he says, people like to give their pastors food, and then he goes on and says, actually food and ties, but I rarely wear a tie, so we get lots of food.